Good evening, friends. Tonight, we'll drift together into a story that is not meant to excite, but to soften. A story that carries you like a gentle current across the centuries into the cloisters and kitchens of medieval monasteries. So, settle yourself in. Dim your lights, if they're still glowing. Pull the blanket around your shoulders, the way monks once wrapped their heavy woolen robes against the chill stone walls. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out like the sigh of wind through an abbey courtyard. This time is just for you, a pause in the day, a lull before sleep. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, helps your mind find that quiet lane into rest, you might tap the like button or subscribe, but only if it feels right. No rush, no pressure, just gentle gratitude for your company. Now, let's begin. Picture, if you will, a cool dawn somewhere in the 14th century. The air is damp with dew, the grass bent low beneath tiny droplets that shimmer in the early light. A bell rings, not too loudly, not like the clamor of church bells in a town square, but softer, coaxing monks from their straw mattresses. And just as their sandals scrape across flagstones, ready to begin a quiet prayer, a sound erupts from the fields, a gaggle of geese, honking, flapping, arguing with the sunrise itself. Let me tell you, monks knew silence as a discipline. They practiced it at meals, in corridors, even when they longed to gossip about the latest batch of cheese. But geese were immune to vows. They honked without cease. They honked at dawn, at noon, at midnight, like medieval alarm clocks with a faulty snooze button. Imagine being Brother Thomas, eyes half closed, mumbling a psalm when suddenly, honk! A goose interrupts as though correcting his Latin. One could almost see the line of monks shuffling, shoulders stiff, lips tight, pretending not to hear, but see, Cretly thinking the same thing. Why do we keep these birds so close to the cloister? The truth was, geese were practical. They guarded monastery grounds with more enthusiasm than dogs, raising their honking alarm at the faintest rustle. They gave meat, eggs, and down for bedding. In a way, they were medieval multi-tools, but convenience rarely makes for quiet. There's a charming account, at least charming to us, centuries later, where a chronicler notes that the monks of St. Gertrude's Abbey struggled with the endless gabble of fowl. One wonders if he meant the novices or the geese. The line between them might have blurred. Let your imagination drift to the cloister garden. Herbs grow in neat rows. Sage, rosemary, lavender. The stone benches are cool, damp from the night, and around the edges geese strut as though they own the place. Their feet slap against stone, their beaks dip into the pond, and every so often a quarrel breaks out. Honks echo off the cloister walls like the acoustics of a cathedral rehearsal. Now, as we wander here together, don't hurry. Feel the air. It smells faintly of mint crushed underfoot, of damp earth, of feathers. There's a softness in the morning breeze, like a breath on your cheek. The monks, patient but weary, tried many tricks. Some herded the geese farther afield, only for them to waddle back, wings spread as though declaring victory. Some prayed for patience, a noble effort, though perhaps undermined when a goose snatched the hem of a robe mid-prayer. Have you ever tried to focus on something important, writing an email, reading a page, while your neighbor's lawnmower growls through the window? That was the goose, centuries earlier, a timeless test of concentration. And yet there's something oddly soothing about this chaos, isn't there? The clash of silence and sound, the hum of monks' chants undercut by nature's unruly chorus. It paints a picture of life not as perfect tranquility, but as a gentle dance with interruptions. As the day wore on, the geese didn't stop. During meals, monks ate in silence while a reader spoke from scripture. Imagine Brother Matthew, voice steady, intoning a passage about patience or humility, while outside, honk, honk, honk. Did he raise his voice slightly, just a notch, to be heard? Or did he accept that his words were simply accompanied by percussion? It's easy to smile at the thought. A medieval audiobook, Geese as background track. YouTube would probably call it scripture with ambient goose sounds. 2 hours. Now let's move closer. We're in the refectory, the dining hall. Long wooden tables polished by elbows and breadcrumbs. The smell of pottage, thick with barley and turnips. Candles flicker in iron sconces, and through the small, glassless windows comes the unmistakable, honking refrain. One brother sighs, another adjusts his cowl. No one complains aloud, for to complain is to break silence. But in the furtive glance, in the twitch of an eyebrow, you see centuries of collective frustration. Why not simply eat the geese? Ah, but here's the twist. Geese were not just livestock. They were status. They were a sign of prosperity. A monastery with geese showed it had land, ponds, and resources. To rid themselves of the birds would be like a modern office giving up its coffee machine. Unthinkable, no matter how loud the percolator. So the monks endured. They endured with wry patience, with prayers, with occasional muttered jokes. Some abbots even wrote rules about where geese could wander, trying to enforce boundaries the birds happily ignored. I wonder, do you feel yourself settling into this riti? The steady backdrop of life in stone corridors, punctuated by honks? Let it be like a lullaby, not jarring but repetitive, familiar. Noise that over time blends into the fabric of daily life. Picture the evening now. The sun lowers, painting the cloister with honey gold light. The monks gather for Compline, their final prayer. Voices rise in chant, slow, resonant, weaving through the arches. Outside, a goose honks again, late to the service, but eager to contribute. The monks do not laugh, though perhaps one hides a smile in his sleeve. And here, in this moment, centuries collapse. We can almost hear it ourselves. The chant, the echo, the honk, a trio of sound that belongs not just to history, but to the lull between waking and sleep. As we leave the chapel, the torches flicker low. The air is cooler, crisper. Somewhere, feathers rustle as geese settle in for the night, and perhaps, just perhaps, the monks finally get a few hours of silence, until dawn breaks again and the chorus resumes. So let us drift with them into that pause. Let your breath match the pace of the night, slow, steady, calm. For in this ancient tale of noisy geese, we find the oddest comfort, that even in pursuit of silence, the world hums, honks, and keeps us company. Night settles deeper over the abbey, and the monks, weary from a long day of prayer, labor, and goose negotiations, drift into their dormitory. Imagine a long, narrow hall, rows of straw mattresses placed against the cold stone walls, each one covered with a rough woolen blanket. The air smells faintly of beeswax from extinguished candles, of damp robes hung up to dry, and the earthy, slightly sharp scent of hay. The monks lower themselves into bed with the kind of sigh that only comes when bones have been busy hauling buckets or grinding grain. Silence reigns at last, or so it seems, for even in the dead of night the geese do not entirely rest. From the nearby pond, one goose honks. Another replies, as if engaged in some midnight debate. A third joins in, flapping its wings against the water with a slapping rhythm. Brother Thomas, half asleep, pulls the blanket over his head. Brother Matthew shifts and mutters a half prayer, half grumble, and yet no one leaves their bed. They have learned over years that the geese will eventually tire themselves out. There's an almost comic tenderness in this picture, isn't there? Holy men, striving for divine silence, defeated nightly by waterfowl with strong opinions. In fact, I sometimes wonder if the monks secretly came to rely on those noises. After all, complete silence can feel heavy. The soft creak of a bed, the rustle of feathers outside, these sounds break the void, reminding you that life hums even while you sleep. Imagine yourself there, lying among them, wrapped in scratchy wool, the stone floor beneath you cool, the sound of a goose faint but steady through the narrow window. Oddly enough, it begins to feel like a lullaby, a rhythm beyond your control, but one that nudges you closer to rest. Now, let's wander beyond the abbey walls. Dawn is rising again, and with it, the monks must perform their chores. One of the most important, tending the gardens and animals. The goose yard, of course, is lively long before the monks arrive. Picture the scene. The gate creaks open, and the birds rush forward, wings outstretched, beaks open in indignant honks. They crowd around the monks' sandals, tugging at the hems of their habits, demanding food as though they haven't eaten in centuries. Brother Peter, tasked with scattering grain, does so with the weary grace of a man who knows the routine well. The geese swarm like feathered tides, honks overlapping into one continuous soundscape. If you've ever heard bagpipes warming up, you know the effect. Loud, insistent, oddly rising. These birds were not without their humor. Chronicles tell us of geese snatching bread from novices, of wings flapping wildly during processions, of monks forced to pause their solemn walk while a goose strutted proudly across the cloister, refusing to be rushed. It was, perhaps, the medieval version of comic relief. Even in a world filled with solemnity, scripture, and discipline, life had its clowns. Only these clowns came with feathers. Let me draw you into one such moment. A summer afternoon, the monks sit at a long bench outdoors, repairing nets for fishing. The sun is high, bees hum lazily in the lavender, and their hands move steadily, looping and tying. Suddenly, a goose charges through, trailing a scrap of stolen cloth from the tailor's room. Monks scramble, sandals slapping, habits flapping, trying not to laugh aloud at the spectacle. The goose, of course, wins the chase, disappearing triumphantly around the corner. And there you are, drifting closer to sleep, the scene playing in your mind like a slow comedy. But the monks were practical too. They took note of which geese laid the best eggs, which were the most aggressive guards, and which had personalities that might be described in polite Latin as uncooperative. Their records show breeding choices, feeding routines, and even occasional remedies for goose ailments. One such remedy, from a 13th century herbal text, suggests rubbing goose feet with rosemary oil if the bird seems unsteady. I'll let you picture that for a moment. A monk, stooping over, gently massaging the webbed foot of a complaining goose. A scene equal parts tender and absurd. And in all this, one finds the essence of monastic life. Patience, persistence, and a quiet humor that never made it into the official chants, but lingered nonetheless. Pause with me here. Hear the geese still, but softer now, as though distance has muffled their clamor. Hear the wind moving through tall grass, the rustle of robes as monks pass by, the faraway toll of a bell. Everything moves at a slower pace, steady and circular, like the turning of seasons. By the time the sun lowers again, the monks gather once more in the refectory. Bread is broken, pottage ladled, and outside, the geese prepare themselves for another evening performance. It's repetitive, yes, but so is the heartbeat, so is the tide, so is the rise and fall of your breath. Let those repetitions sink into you now, a rhythm ancient and calming. For in this small chapter of history, in this strange story of monks and their noisy geese, we find a lullaby that has crossed centuries to meet you here tonight. The days of the monastery passed with little variation, but in that repetition there was comfort. To modern minds, the idea of hearing the same sounds, seeing the same sights, and walking the same stone paths might feel confining. But to the monks, routine was sacred. It was a way to train the soul, to pare away distraction. Except, of course, for the geese. They refused to honor routine. If the monks processed to prayer at the same hour, the geese might interrupt with a sudden cacophonous quarrel in the pond. If the monks gathered in the scriptorium, quietly illuminating manuscripts, the geese might crowd outside the window, honking as though demanding to be copied into the margins. Imagine a monk with a quill in hand, carefully tracing a letter in gold leaf, only to have his hand jerk at the sound of a sudden honk. Somewhere in Europe, even now, there may be manuscripts with slightly wobbly letters, geese immortalized in ink by accident. It's funny, isn't it, how life never quite obeys our rules. Even in spaces dedicated to silence, the world insists on its noise. Yet in that noise there is personality, even affection. The monks, in their way, grew fond of these interruptions. In one record, an abbot described the geese as vigorous guardians and persistent heralds, a polite way, perhaps, of admitting they were noisy neighbors. Another monk wrote that geese remind us of the frailty of patience, a gentle joke tucked into a margin. Let us pause here and listen. Hear the scratch of quills on parchment, steady, rhythmic. Hear the rustle of robes as monks shift in their seats, and over it all, the faint but insistent honk from beyond the cloister wall. Layers of sound, none of them overwhelming, all of them weaving together into something curiously soothing. The scriptorium itself was a place of beauty. High windows let in shafts of pale light. Dust motes drifted like tiny stars, turning in the air. The scent of ink and vellum hung heavy, mingled with beeswax from candles. It was cool and still, and every so often the silence was broken by a goose announcing its presence as boldly as any bell. One can almost imagine the monks laughing in secret, though laughter was not always permitted. Perhaps their eyes met, a sparkle of amusement shared before they bent their heads again. And the food. Oh, the food that tied monks and geese together. Eggs were prized, not only boiled and eaten with coarse bread, but sometimes whisked into richer dishes for feast days. A goose egg, larger than a chicken's, was a treasure. Imagine the delight of cracking one open, the yolk golden and rich, enough to thicken a pudding or enrich a custard. Feast days brought roast goose too, though sparingly. The smell of sizzling fat filled the kitchens, mingling with herbs clipped fresh from the garden. Outside, the surviving geese strutted indignantly, perhaps aware of their fallen comrade. Honk, honk, honk. The sound of complaint or mourning, who can say? In this way, geese were both companions and cuisine, both comic and practical, a contradiction the monks accepted with patient shrugs. Now, take a slow breath. Let the image settle. Stone walls, flickering candles, quills scratching, honks drifting. Each detail fits like a piece of a puzzle, forming a tapestry of life both disciplined and delightfully disrupted. As evening fell, the monks would sometimes walk the cloister paths in quiet meditation. The garden smelled of crushed thyme, of rose petals falling, of damp soil cooling in the dusk. The geese waddled among them, heads bobbing, eyes bright. The monks ignored them as best they could, but every so often a goose demanded attention with a sudden honk at close range. It's easy to picture the startled jump of a novice, his wide eyes, his suppressed giggle. The older monks, seasoned veterans of the goose chorus, barely flinched anymore. And perhaps this is the heart of the story, how the extraordinary becomes ordinary. How even chaos folds itself into routine. In time, the monks stopped hearing the honks as interruptions. They became part of the abbey's soundtrack, as steady as the toll of the bell, as familiar as the turning of pages. Think about your own life for a moment. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside your window, the tick of a clock. Noisy, perhaps, if you notice it, but often it fades, becomes invisible. Even comforting. For the monks, geese were that hum, a loud, flapping, feathered hum, but a hum nonetheless. As night gathers again in our story, let the sounds soften. Hear the low chant of Compline, the last prayer of the day. Hear the geese outside, settling into their own night noises, a rustle of wings, a soft murmur, and then, inevitably, one last honk before sleep. And as you listen, allow yourself to drift. For just as the monks learned to rest amid the geese, you too can rest amid the sounds of your own world. Morning light spilled once more through the tall, arched windows of the abbey. The bell rang, summoning the monks to rise, their sandals scuffing across the stone floors as they shuffled toward prayer. And right on cue, as if rehearsed for centuries, the geese began their chorus. Honk, honk, honk. A flutter of wings, a splash in the pond, and the day was declared open. If you or I were there, perhaps we'd smile at the regularity of it, the way the geese could be trusted more than any clock tower. But to the monks, craving silence, it was a test renewed every dawn. Still, their lives revolved not only around prayer, but also around work, and in that work the geese were unavoidable. One task often assigned to novices was collecting goose feathers. The down was plucked after molting, soft as cloud tufts, destined for pillows and quilts. Imagine a young novice tiptoeing toward a goose with hopeful hands, only to retreat in haste as the bird lunged forward, beak snapping. Feather collection, in truth, was more a battle than a harvest. And yet, from such battles came comfort. Monks laid their heads each night on pillows stuffed with goose down, the very same creatures who tormented them by day. There's a lesson there, isn't there? The irritations of life sometimes yield its sweetest comforts. In the kitchen, goose fat was rendered, a golden liquid stored in small clay pots. It fried onions, flavored pottage, and gleamed like treasure in the flickering firelight. Imagine the smell of onions sizzling, the sharp bite mellowing into sweetness, while outside geese honked as though demanding credit. And indeed, in a way, they deserved it. Step outside with me now, into the yard. The geese strut across the grass, their feathers catching the sun like polished ivory. Their feet slap wetly in the mud, leaving prints in patterns as if writing their own story. The pond reflects the abbey's walls, a mirror cracked only by ripples from paddling wings. The monks, intent on their chores, do not shoo the geese away. They endure them, perhaps even, dare I suggest, cherish them. For though they longed for silence, they also understood the value of what the birds gave. History tells us that in 1370, a chronicler described the goose as the most vigilant guardian of land. Roman soldiers had said the same centuries earlier when geese in the Capitoline Hill raised an alarm against intruders. The monks, inheritors of that long tradition, knew their abbey was safer because of those noisy birds. Picture the abbey walls at dusk. Shadows lengthen, torches flicker, and beyond the walls stretch fields quiet and vast. To guard such a place with silence alone would have been folly. The geese, with their cries, kept foxes and thieves at bay. They may have disturbed prayer, but they preserved bread, grain, and life itself. And so the monks endured, balanced between annoyance and gratitude. Do you feel it? The rhythm of their lives, where irritation mingles with dependence, where noise becomes part of the fabric of calm. That balance is something we all live with, whether it's geese or traffic or the hum of appliances. Noise, in time, becomes lullaby. Imagine one evening in late autumn. The air is sharp with the smell of smoke from hearths, the fields stripped bare after harvest. The monks gather for supper, bowls steaming with cabbage stew. Outside, the geese honk louder than ever, unsettled by the change in air. A novice, bold or perhaps weary, dares to whisper under his breath. They preach more than we do. The elder beside him does not scold. Instead, his lips twitch into the smallest smile. There is kindness in that silence. And perhaps that's the greatest gift the geese gave. Patience stretched into humor. An acceptance that life is never perfectly quiet, but that imperfection can be its own form of peace. Now, let us linger here at the close of the day. The monks finish their meal. The bowls are gathered, the candles lowered. Outside, the geese finally, slowly, drift into slumber. A wing settles, a honk softens into a sigh. The pond reflow, X the stars, and in that stillness, broken yet whole, the abbey rests, and you too may rest, knowing that even centuries ago, sleep was found not in silence alone, but in the gentle chorus of a world that never truly hushes. Winter arrived with a hush of snow upon the cloister roofs. The geese, however, were not silenced by the season. Their honks echoed against frosted walls, each breath puffing into the cold like smoke. The monks, bundled in heavy robes, shuffled along paths swept clear by hand, their sandals crunching frost. And always the geese were there, like sentinels with voices far too loud for the frozen dawn. One might think winter would quiet them, but geese thrive in cold air, their feathers puffed, trapping warmth, their orange feet pattering against ice as if to test its strength. The monks, poor souls, had less insulation. They rubbed hands together, blew into sleeves, and tried to ignore the birds' triumphal chorus. Imagine Brother Matthew shivering in the scriptorium. His ink freezes if left too long, so he warms it by the brazier before dipping his quill. Outside, the geese march along the cloister wall, honking as though offering commentary on every line he writes. Perhaps he mutters under his breath, "Amen, amen. Yes, I hear you." There is humor in that, but also resilience. The monks did not complain much in their records. Perhaps they knew the futility of it. Complaints do not silence geese, nor does wishing bring warmth to frozen hands. So they accepted, patiently, the way one accepts an old creaky floorboard or a clock that ticks too loudly. Winter also brought feast days, and with them the occasional goose roast, the kitchen filled with the scent of roasting meat, fat dripping and crackling in the fire. Outside, the remaining geese paced, honking with indignation, as though aware of their missing brethren. The monks, restrained though they were, surely felt a flicker of satisfaction on such days. The noise, transformed into nourishment, must have tasted doubly sweet. They chewed slowly, savoring not only the flavor, but also the quiet that followed a belly full of goose. Yet not every goose was destined for the table. Many lived long, strutting lives, immortalized in anecdotes and in the sighs of novices. One story tells of a goose that followed a monk everywhere, even into the chapel. The bird refused to be barred, and eventually the abbot allowed it to stand near the door during prayers. Imagine the solemn chant, echoed by a stray honk at the back. Was it disruptive? Certainly, but perhaps also oddly fitting. Creation itself answering the prayers of men. There is a gentleness to that thought, don't you think? That even noisy creatures play their part in sacred rhythm. As spring thawed the fields, the cycle began anew. Eggs filled baskets, feathers were plucked, and the honks rose like trumpets greeting the warmer air. And the monks, accustomed by now, moved with a kind of weary grace through it all. You can almost feel yourself there, walking the path between cloister and garden. The air is damp, the scent of soil rich, the sound of geese overlapping with the murmur of bees. You pass Bro, their Peter, stooping to gather herbs, and he nods with a small smile as if to say, yes, they are loud, but they are ours. And maybe that's the lesson of the geese chorus, that even what irritates us can belong to us, can mark the shape of our days, can become oddly beloved. So as the sun sets once more, the abbey is cast in warm gold, the pond shimmers, and the geese settle into their nightly murmurs. The monks file to bed, blankets pulled close, and outside the window, the faint honk drifts like a lullaby. The monastery lived in cycles, and those cycles, like the rhythm of your own breath, turned again and again, season after season, year after year. Geese grew, geese squabbled, geese laid eggs, and geese startled novices carrying buckets of water. The monks, too, grew older, their backs bending, their hair whitening, their steps slowing on the cold stone, but the honking never seemed to change. Perhaps that is why the birds felt eternal. They were not measured in the brief spans of human patience, but in the steady continuity of noise. Where one goose ended, another began. The chorus never broke. Close your eyes and hear it. The deep-throated honk of a gander by the pond, answered by the higher, sharper cry of a younger bird. Wings slap water, splashes echo against cloister walls. Layer upon layer of sound, chaotic yet strangely even, like waves, like wind in the trees, like a heartbeat just a little out of rhythm. The monks, intent on their lives of discipline, came to understand this not as disruption but as part of their environment, no different from the rain or the winter wind. A novice fresh to the abbey might grumble at first. He might roll his eyes or whisper complaints into his sleeve, but after months, even years, he too would stop hearing the honks as interruptions. They would blend into the air, like background hum, woven so tightly into his days that he could no longer imagine silence without them. And you, lying in your own bed now, may recognize that feeling, that moment when a sound becomes part of the room, part of the night. A refrigerator's hum, a clock's tick, the faint rush of traffic outside, annoying perhaps if you isolate it, but comforting once it is accepted. The monks recorded small notes about their birds, tucked into ledgers and annals. They keep the fox away. They trouble the novices. They provide eggs in good number. Simple lines, but behind them we can hear the sigh, the shrug, the smile that surely accompanied each pen stroke. And there were stories, little tales passed on in the cloister, whispered like bedtime jokes between prayers. One goose that chased a bishop during a visit, sending him flapping his own robes in retreat. Another that refused to leave the side of a sick monk, standing guard by his bed as though offering prayers of its own. These stories, half humorous, half affectionate, remind us that geese were more than noise. They were characters in the abbey's play. Imagine walking with me now through the cloister garden at twilight. The air cools, the scent of crushed thyme sharpens underfoot. Candles glow faintly in the windows, casting soft halos. The monks' voices rise from the chapel, low and steady in chant, and through it, from the pond, comes the familiar counterpoint, a honk, insistent and oddly fitting. The world, it seems, does not divide neatly between sacred and silly. Sometimes they mingle, one layered gently atop the other, until the chant and the honk seem like parts of the same music. Pause here. Breathe with the rhythm of that chant. Slow, steady, unhurried. Let the honk drift across it, not harsh but inevitable, like a stone skipping across water. And with each breath, let yourself sink deeper, not into silence, but into harmony. Night deepens. Stars appear overhead, faint against the dark velvet of sky. The pond mirrors them, broken only by ripples. The geese, at last, quiet themselves, folding wings, tucking heads. Their breathing slows, feathers ruffle softly. They sleep, and in their slumber, so too does the abbey finally find its stillness. The monks slip into their dormitory, pull their rough blankets high, and close their eyes. The stone holds its coolness. The straw smells faintly of hay, and the air is heavy with the peace that comes after long noise. One by one, they surrender to dreams, accompanied not by silence, but by the memory of geese, annoying, faithful, eternal. And perhaps that is the gentle truth of this chapter, that even the noisiest things can become companions to our rest once we allow them to be. So let us leave the Abbey of St. Gertrude now, just as the monks drift to sleep. Let the night close softly around you, the air cool on your skin, the faint ripple of a pond in your ear. Let your breath move slowly, in rhythm with their chant, their footsteps, their laughter, their sighs. And know, as you drift further into calm, that even centuries ago, others lay in their beds, smiling faintly at the sound of geese, waiting for dreams to carry them away. Good evening again, dear listener. If you're still with me, awake but softened, I invite you to sink a little deeper into this unfolding tale. The monks of St. Gertrude's did not live alone in their patience. There were always newcomers, young men barely trained, eager to prove themselves worthy of vows. And more often than not, these novices were given one very particular duty: tending the geese. Imagine yourself as a boy of perhaps 16, your sandals new, your robe far too long, sleeves flapping around your wrists. You've only just said farewell to family, and now you rise at dawn with the bell, shuffle with the others, and discover that your holy service involves chasing geese across muddy courtyards. What must it have felt like? The geese do not listen, of course. They waddle where they please. They tug at your robe. They flap their wings into your startled face. They honk directly into your ears, a sound as unholy as any devil's trumpet. You are told this is discipline, that patience will grow if you endure it. But in the moment, all you feel is frustration and perhaps a suppressed laugh. The chronicles mention novices being tested by the unruly flock. The phrase almost sounds like a ritual, doesn't it? As if goose tending were less a chore and more an initiation. Perhaps it was, for in chasing geese, you learned persistence, humility, and above all, how little control you really have in life. Picture one such novice, Brother Aelred. He sets out with a basket of grain, hoping to scatter it neatly. The geese see him coming. Their heads lift, their eyes gleam, their feet slap the ground as they charge like feathered soldiers. In moments he is surrounded, grain spilling everywhere, robe tugged by sharp beaks. He flails, the basket tips, and the courtyard fills with honking triumph. Do the elder monks help? Not often. They watch from the cloister, lips twitching with amusement, perhaps whispering prayers for his patience. They endured it once. Now it is another's turn. And slowly, across weeks and months, Aelred learns. He scatters grain farther away from himself, retreating quickly. He carries a stick, not to strike, but to hold at arm's length like a barrier. He walks with more confidence, less panic. The geese sense it. They still honk, but they give him space. In the noise, he finds a rhythm. In the rhythm, he finds calm. Isn't that how so many of our own struggles feel? At first, overwhelming. Later, simply background. And at last, familiar enough to carry without thought. But the novices were still boys at heart. And boys, even holy ones, crave mischief. Small rebellions blossomed amid the duty. One novice might mimic the honks back at the birds, drawing laughter when a goose seemed to answer. Another might sneak a crust of bread, leading a feathered parade across the cloister in mock procession. These were not recorded in formal chronicles, but we can almost hear them in the margins, in the chuckles muffled beneath robes. Life, after all, is never without laughter, no matter how solemn the vow. Let's walk with them now, along the cloister walk where arches frame the garden. The stone is cool beneath your sandals, the air scented with rosemary and damp earth. A novice slips past, clutching a broom, his face tense with effort as he herds 3 geese ahead of him. They scatter suddenly, one to the left, one to the right, one straight back at him. He groans, throws up his hands, and from the cloister benches, older monks smile. These moments were lessons cloaked in feathers, for when the novice learned patience with geese, he might later find patience with scripture, with prayer, with the quiet discipline of years. The birds, noisy as they were, became teachers, and the novices, in time, became fond of their tormentors. They named them, whispered silly titles: Abbot Honk, Sister Feathers, the Bishop of Beaks. Such names never entered official ledgers, but surely they were spoken, because where humans and animals live side by side, affection grows, even through annoyance. Now, imagine evening falling. The novices gather in the yard, sweeping, scattering the last feed. The geese settle slowly, wings tucked, heads drooping. The courtyard glows in twilight, the sky painted soft rose and violet, and in that hush, a novice pauses, leaning on his broom. For a moment, he forgets the annoyance, the tugged robe, the pecked hand. All he hears is the low murmur of birds settling, the faint trickle of water in the fountain, the dista, yet chant of vespers, and he breathes. And perhaps, for the first time, he understands what patience feels like. So you see, these loud, flapping creatures were not just guardians of the abbey. They were guardians of the soul, pushing young men to soften, to bend, to laugh, and eventually to rest. And as we close this part of their story, let your own breath settle as the geese settle. Let the noise around you, whatever it may be, become less a disruption and more a rhythm. For even honking, in its persistence, can be a kind of lullaby. When spring bloomed across the abbey's fields, the novices found their goose duty more challenging than ever. The pond swelled with meltwater, the grass shot up in green blades, and the geese were more energetic than saints at Easter Mass. Honks rang out like brass horns announcing a festival, only this festival never ended. The novices had to guide the birds to fresh patches of grass, leading them with baskets of grain. It was less a walk and more a parade, though one entirely unwilling on the monk's part. Picture Brother Aelred again, this time joined by Brother Clement. They trudge across the yard, arms aching with baskets, while behind them the geese strut in unruly ranks, honking their complaints at every step. And yet, in these comical parades, something tender grew. The novices learned to anticipate the geese's moods. The sharp cry of hunger, the softer murmur of contentment, the wild flapping that meant a quarrel had broken out among them. They began to speak of the birds not only as chores, but as personalities. One goose, with a lopsided wing, became known as the Wandering Bishop, for it never stayed with the group. Another, particularly aggressive, was the General. These nicknames passed among the novices like whispered secrets, hidden from the abbot's ears, but carried in shared laughter. The abbey's chronicles rarely note such small details, but we can imagine them, can't we? Because wherever humans live with animals, those bonds, part irritation, part affection, are universal. Sometimes the novices staged their own little games. One would toss a pebble into the pond and wager whether the geese would charge it. Another would mimic the birds' calls, testing how many would respond. Their laughter, though stifled behind sleeves, echoed down the cloisters. And though such mischief was not encouraged, it was tolerated, for even in holy places, youth must breathe. There was another layer to this work, too. The geese were vital to the abbey's self-sufficiency. Their eggs were rich in nutrients, their feathers essential for quills. Imagine Brother Clement, tasked with trimming feathers for writing. He sits patiently with a small knife, shaving a goose quill into the perfect point. Outside the window, the very bird it came from honks indignantly, as if protesting the indignity of being turned into scripture. What an image! Holy words written with goose feathers, while the geese themselves shout their commentary from the yard. Perhaps the Psalms of patience were best understood when written this way. Now, let us walk again with the novices at dusk. The light fades, turning the abbey walls to soft amber. The geese gather near the pond, heads tucked low, their noises softer now, more murmurs than honks. The boys scatter the last handful of grain, their robes dusted with chaff, their sandals muddy. They breathe deep, shoulders aching, yet find themselves smiling. Because in truth, they are learning something vital, that service is rarely glamorous, that peace is not always silence, and that even geese have lessons to teach. There is a small story, half legend, half truth, that one novice, frustrated beyond bearing, tried to out-honk the geese in defiance. He stood in the yard, filling his lungs, and gave his loudest shout. The geese froze. Then all answered at once in a cacophony so loud it brought monks running. The abbot found the novice doubled over with laughter, the geese triumphant in their victory. His punishment? To tend the geese for an extra month, a sentence equal parts discipline and comedy. But here's the thing. By the end of that month, the novice no longer minded. He had learned their rhythms, their quirks, their strange companionship. What began as torment became routine, and what was routine slowly became comfort. Isn't that how so many burdens transform? At first they weigh heavy. Later they fit into the shape of our days until we hardly notice. And sometimes, strangely enough, we would miss them if they disappeared. The novices likely never forgot their time as goosekeepers. Years later, as older monks themselves, perhaps they chuckled when watching new boys chased around the yard. Perhaps they whispered, "I too was pecked by the Bishop of Beaks." Shared memory, binding generations together. And in that memory, a lesson that patience is not taught in silence, but in noise, not in perfection, but in the flapping chaos of daily life. Now, let us slow our pace. Picture the cloister again under starlight. The novices lie in their narrow beds, muscles sore, hands scratched, ears still ringing faintly with honks. But their breathing slows, their minds settle, and the day drifts away. Outside, the geese shift in their sleep, feathers rustling softly. Even in rest, the birds are never entirely still, but their noise has dulled to a murmur, a lull more than a disruption, and so the boys sleep, learning patience not only in waking but in dreams. And you, too, can let that lesson settle into your breath. Whatever noises linger around you tonight, let them blur, soften, fold themselves into your rest. For if monks could sleep beside the endless chorus of geese, surely you can rest in the music of your own world. Summer came, and with it long hours of light that stretched the novices' chores. The sun rose early, scattering gold over the abbey walls, and the geese were quick to follow, announcing dawn long before the bell. Their honks rolled across the fields, bouncing against stone, shaking novices from what little sleep they managed. "Better than a rooster," Brother Aelred muttered one morning, rubbing his eyes as he stumbled toward the yard. Brother Clement only groaned, pulling his robe tighter. The geese met them at the gate, flapping their wings as though scolding them for being late. Imagine that courtyard, stone warmed by the morning sun, herbs releasing their fragrance as dew dried from their leaves, novices blinking against the brightness, and across it all, the sound of honking, a relentless soundtrack that made prayer feel like an afterthought. Yet even amid the chaos, life grew tender. The novices began to recognize individual geese not only by habit but by voice. A sharp bark belonged to the general, always ready for battle. A lower, grumbling honk was the wandering bishop, muttering as he strayed from the flock. To outsiders, it was only noise. To the novices, it was a chorus of familiar voices. There is something comforting about familiarity, even when it is loud. At midday, when the sun was hottest, the novices often led the geese toward the pond. The water shimmered, dragonflies skimming its surface, reeds whispering in the wind. The birds slid in eagerly, splashing and dipping their heads, shaking droplets across the grass. The novices sat on the bank, sandals off, cooling their own tired feet in the shallows. For a moment, irritation softened into peace. The geese swam, the boys rested, and the air was filled not with quarrels, but with the gentler sounds of water lapping, wings rustling, and a chorus that had mellowed into something like contentment. Perhaps you know that feeling, when a task you dreaded suddenly reveals its quiet gift, when you realize you are not simply working, but sharing space, sharing rhythm with the world around you. The abbey's elders, wise in their way, knew this. They allowed the novices these moments, even encouraged them, for they understood that peace was not found in fleeing noise, but in befriending it. One tale tells of an abbot who, noticing the novices' exhaustion, instructed them not to drive the geese one afternoon. "Let them wander," he said, "and wander yourselves." And so the boys sat beneath a tree, geese strutting freely, and for a few hours the abbey was filled with laughter instead of honks. The geese eventually returned on their own, as if reminding everyone that control is not always necessary. How often do we too try to drive the geese of our own lives, every noise, every distraction, every inconvenience, when perhaps the better path is simply to let them wander, to let them exist until they return in their own time? As evening fell, the novices had one more task, gathering goose eggs. The nests lay hidden among reeds and grass, warm with feathers. Carefully, the boys reached in, wary of pecks. The eggs were large, heavy in the palm, their shells pale and mottled. Carried in baskets, they clinked softly together, like stones against wood. The kitchen greeted them with heat and scent. Pots bubbled, bread baked, onions caramelized slowly in goose fat. The eggs were boiled, scrambled, sometimes baked into custards for feast days. The novices, though weary, felt a spark of pride knowing their noisy charges had provided such nourishment. There is something deeply satisfying in contribution, even when the task is humble, and so the boys, covered in feathers and dust, entered supper with heads held a little higher. Now, walk with me into the refectory. The tables stretch long, wood worn smooth by generations of elbows. Candles flicker, their flames bending in unseen drafts. The novices eat quietly, listening to the reader recite scripture. Outside, the geese murmur their twilight chorus, softer now, but still present, as though determined never to be forgotten. And in truth, they never were. For the geese had shaped not only the novices' patience, but their memories. Decades later, when those boys were gray-haired monks, they still smiled at the mention of goose duty. What had once felt like torment became a fond tale, told in slow voices to newer novices. Isn't that how memory works? The irritations of youth become the humor of age. The things that kept us awake become the stories that lull us to sleep. And as you listen now, let that truth soften your own heart. Whatever noise clutters your days, whatever geese flap and honk in your life, one day you may look back with tenderness, even gratitude. So let us pause here in the cool night of the abbey. The novices lie on their straw mattresses, muscles tired, minds drifting. The geese, too, settle near the pond, feathers rustling like soft brushstrokes on canvas. And over it all, the stars gleam steady, indifferent to honks or chants. Let your breath follow that steadiness now. In, out, no hurry, no rush, just rhythm, like geese on water, like monks in prayer, like your own heart moving quietly toward sleep. Autumn crept over the abbey like a soft blanket. The trees beyond the cloister walls blushed with gold and russet. Leaves fell in spirals, carpeting the ground so that each step crackled faintly. The novices, tasked with goosekeeping, now found themselves guiding their charges through fallen leaves, the birds pecking curiously at acorns, honking as if to announce every discovery. It was a season of gathering. The monks harvested apples, pressed them into cider, stacked wood high for the cold months. The novices, too, gathered goose eggs, feathers, and patience. Imagine the crispness of the air, cool enough to redden cheeks, carrying the scent of smoke from hearth fires. The geese, invigorated by the chill, strutted with more vigor than ever. Their honks grew sharper, echoing in the clear air like horns calling an unseen army. The novices trudged behind, cloaks drawn close, trying to keep order. There is something comical in the picture, isn't there? Young men aspiring to sainthood tugged this way and that by feathered creatures with minds of their own. And yet, in that comedy lies something deeper, for life rarely matches the order we imagine. More often, it honks, flaps, and pulls us sideways through leaves. The abbey's records mention the din of geese at Michaelmas, as though it were as predictable as the turning of the seasons. Indeed, the birds were part of the abbey's liturgical rhythm, marking time with noise rather than silence. And in autumn, they were more than noise. They were feast. On the feast of St. Michael, tradition called for roast goose, the kitchen filled with the heady scent of herbs, sage, thyme, parsley, stuffed inside birds browned over flames. Fat sizzled, dripping into the fire, sending up sparks that danced against the blackened stone. The novices, having tended those very birds, watched with mixed emotions, relief, perhaps, that one less honk would pierce their ears, regret, perhaps, that a familiar face would not greet them at dawn. At table, the monks chewed slowly, savoring not only the taste but the occasion. Outside, the surviving geese honked indignantly as though mourning their lost brethren, or perhaps simply demanding a share. It is an odd thought, but maybe even in their complaints, the geese contributed to gratitude. Every honk outside the window reminded the monks of what lay on their plates, of the cycle of provision and sacrifice that sustained the abbey. The novices, too, learned this lesson. They understood that the creatures who annoyed them were also those who fed them, clothed them, warmed them at night. The same geese who tugged their sleeves provided down for winter quilts. The same who pecked at their sandals gave fat for cooking. Irritation and gratitude bound together. Isn't that the way so many relationships are? Annoyance threaded with affection, dependence bound with exasperation. We complain, but we also cherish. We grumble, but we would miss them if they were gone. As the days shortened, the novices' chores took on a softer tone. The geese were herded into shelters against frost, straw laid thick underfoot. The boys carried buckets of water, steam rising in the cold air, and spread grain with fingers numb from chill. The birds crowded close, honking with urgency, their breath puffing white in the air. Inside the cloister, fires crackled, casting warm light on stone. The novices returned from the yard with frozen hands, holding them over flames until they tingled painfully back to life. And outside, always the geese. Their noise no longer startled. It had become part of the abbey's pulse, as natural as the crackle of the hearth. Sometimes on long winter evenings, the novices told each other stories by the fire, quietly, for too much chatter was discouraged. They spoke of geese that chased foxes, of geese that tried to march in line during processions, of geese that honked so persistently during prayers that even the abbot suppressed a smile. In their laughter, patience transformed into fondness, and as night deepened, the abbey grew still. Snow lay heavy on roofs, the pond froze solid, stars glittered cold in the sky. The novices lay on their straw beds, listening faintly to the muffled honks through the walls, not harsh now, but softened by distance, by snow, by time. A lullaby disguised as noise. And perhaps that is what the goose-keeping years gave them most of all, the ability to rest amid sound, to let the world be noisy and still find peace. Now, let your own breath find that same rhythm. The world may hum around you, faint noises, small disturbances, but they do not have to disturb you. Like the novices, you may come to hear them as part of the night, part of the world, part of the lull that carries you toward sleep. The novices' years with the geese stretched out like long corridors of sound. Day after day, dawn after dawn, they learned the rhythms of the flock. What once startled them became expected. What once irritated them became almost invisible. Honks folded into the hours until even silence felt incomplete without them. There's something beautiful in that shift, isn't there? The way our minds adapt, the way noise becomes music if we allow it. One Novi, older now and nearing the time of his vows, wrote in a margin of a prayer book. The geese sing their own psalms, just 4 words, but they speak volumes. For perhaps, after years of tending, he no longer heard noise but prayer. Not chants in Latin, but chants in honk and flap and splash. Imagine standing with him at the edge of the pond in late spring. The air is soft, the reeds sway gently, dragonflies dart, the geese move across the water, leaving rippling wakes behind them. Their cries rise and fall, sometimes harsh, sometimes mellow, weaving with the wind. And you, like the novice, realize that this too is a kind of liturgy. The abbey's elders likely knew this lesson well, but the novices had to discover it for themselves. At first, they rebelled with laughter, with sighs, with whispered nicknames. Later, they endured with patience, and finally, they accepted with affection. Isn't that the journey we all take with the noises of our lives? First, resistance, then tolerance, then, strangely enough, fondness. The abbey itself stood for centuries, its stones weathered by time. Generations of novices came and went, each inheriting the geese, each discovering the same lesson anew. Brother Aelred and Brother Clement were replaced by others, boys with new names, new frustrations, new laughter, and always the birds remained, eternal honkers in a world of fleeting prayers. Even visitors noticed. A traveling friar once remarked that the abbey's silence was pocked by the constant voice of geese. He meant it as a critique, but perhaps it was a compliment in disguise, for a silence that contains the world's noise is truer than silence that excludes it. Now, let us picture the close of another day. The novices, robes dusty, sandals caked with mud, herd the flock toward their shelter. The geese waddle reluctantly, honking protests, wings half spread in drama. The boys sigh, push gently, coax them along. At last, the gate shuts. Straw rustles. The noise fades to a steady murmur. The novices walk back through the cloister, their footsteps slow. The air smells of wood smoke and damp stone. Candles flicker behind narrow windows. From the chapel, a soft chant drifts, low and steady, like a heartbeat stretched across centuries. And the boys, tired yet oddly content, take their places in the dormitory. They stretch out on straw, pull coarse blankets over their shoulders, and listen. Outside, the geese murmur one last time, a sleepy honk, a rustle of wings, and then quiet. Not perfect silence, but enough. Enough for dreams to take root, enough for sleep to wrap them like the cloister's stone walls. And as we step away from their bedsides, let us carry that lesson with us. That noise does not have to be an enemy. That laughter, disruption, complaint, even the honks of geese can become part of the rhythm that lulls us toward rest. So breathe with me now, slow, steady. Imagine the pond, the clo, Ister, the geese settling in the straw. Imagine the novices smiling faintly as their eyes close. And let yourself drift as they drifted, centuries ago, into a night softened not by silence, but by the gentle acceptance of sound. Good evening again, dear friend. If your eyes are still open, let them soften now. If they are half closed, let them rest heavier still. Tonight we wander further into the life of the abbey, where noisy geese were not only companions and guardians, but also food on feast days and temptations during fasts. Picture the refectory once more. Long tables stretch beneath a vaulted ceiling, candle flames bending in the draught. On ordinary days, the monks ate simply, bowls of pottage made from barley and beans, a crust of dark bread, perhaps a ladle of cabbage stew. Quiet filled the hall, broken only by the voice of the appointed reader and, faintly, the muffled honks outside the window. But feast days were different. A hush of anticipation stirred the air. Fires in the great kitchen burned brighter, spits turned slowly, and the scent of goose fat filled every corner of the abbey. Imagine walking past that kitchen, the air heavy with rosemary and thyme, the hiss of juices dripping onto coals. For the novices, who had tended the very birds now roasting, the smell was both pride and pang. On Michaelmas, roast goose was almost a tradition across Europe. The monks of St. Gertrude's were no exception. They carved with care, distributing portions evenly, ensuring no brother received more than another. The meat, tender beneath crisped skin, was savored in silence, though perhaps not without a sparkle of gratitude in each eye. And then came the contrast, fasting days. For nearly half the year, monks fasted from meat. Lent, Advent, weekly observances all drew them back to pottage, bread, and vegetables. And yet, the geese remained outside, honking temptations through every season. Can you imagine sitting at a wooden table, chewing slowly on boiled turnips, while outside a goose struts by the window, honking as if mocking your restraint? The monks bore it patiently, though perhaps with a wry glance now and then. There is one curious note in a 14th century dietary rulebook. Fish may be eaten, but fowl is forbidden, though the goose swims like a fish. Some abbeys argued that geese, dwelling so much in water, might count as fish. A clever loophole. Some monks seized it, declaring goose fare for fasting days. Others, stricter, forbade it. And so arguments about classification fluttered through cloisters alongside feathers. Isn't that wonderfully human? To seek loopholes in rules, to wonder whether a honking, flapping, winged bird might truly be called a fish if only it swam often enough. Let's step into that kitchen again, shall we? The stone hearth glows red, pots bubble with cabbage and barley. On feast days, the spit turns with a goose, its skin blistering golden. On fasting days, the same hearth simmers plain broth, steam rising in ghostly ribbons. The same space, the same fire, the same monks, but how different the air feels depending on what simmers in the pot. For in fasting and feasting, balance lived. To go without made the feast sweeter. To endure plainness made the taste of goose almost divine. Now imagine the novices again, carrying baskets of eggs to the kitchen. On fasting days, the eggs became Lenten dishes, custards thickened with almond milk, simple pancakes fried lightly in oil. On feast days, the same eggs enriched pastries or gilded sauces. The boys may not have tasted much difference at the time, but in memory, I surely recalled the shift, the way the abbey seemed brighter, warmer when goose graced the table. And outside, the flock carried on, unconcerned. Honk, honk, honk. Whether their kin roasted or not, the chorus never ceased. Let us pause here in the refectory. Candles glow, bread breaks. Outside, faint honks echo across the courtyard. Inside, monks chew slowly, prayers murmured. It is neither silence nor noise, but something in between. A rhythm steady enough to carry you, like the sway of a boat on water. And perhaps as you drift further into this story, you too may taste the balance, plainness and richness, quiet and sound, fasting and feast. When autumn deepened and shadows grew longer, feast days felt like bright sparks against the darker fabric of the year. The abbey's calendar was punctuated by these days of celebration, little islands of abundance amid the sea of fasting. For the monks, goose was not merely food, it was ritual, reminder, reward. Picture the refectory on Michaelmas Eve. The novices had worked all day, gathering apples, stacking firewood, and plucking feathers from the chosen birds. Their arms ached, their fingers smelled of resin and hay. Yet, as they filed into supper, the scent of roasted goose met them first. Rich, savory, promising comfort. Candles burned lower than usual, so the firelight painted golden flickers across the monks' bowed heads. In silence, they waited. The abbot raised his hand, said the blessing, and only then did knives cut into crisp skin. The first bite, imagine it, juicy, steaming, infused with sage. For men accustomed to barley broth and turnips, this was almost overwhelming. The silence grew heavier, charged not with discipline but with gratitude. But let us step into the kitchen again, where the story is louder. Novices scurried to fetch more wood for the fire. Pots clanged as they were shifted from one hook to another. Fat hissed as it dripped onto coals, sending up little bursts of flame. And beneath all this, even here, came the muffled honking of geese outside, as if their kin were protesting or perhaps lending a chorus to the feast. Contrast this with Lent. 40 days of plain food, plain flavors, plain silence. Bowls filled with beans softened in water, bread baked hard enough to last a week, cabbage boiled until pale. The same refectory, the same candlelight, but the air smelled of austerity rather than abundance. Outside, the geese continued their noisy lives, oblivious to fasting. Their honks rang out while monks chewed roots. Isn't it curious how the world ignores our rules? We fast, but the geese feast. We restrain, but the world carries on with no thought for our discipline. The monks surely noticed this, though they would never call it unfair. Instead, they saw it as a reminder that the human rhythm of denial and indulgence was but one thread in the tapestry of creation. Sometimes the geese even disrupted fasting discipline. A monk walking past the pond, empty-bellied and craving, might glance at the fat, waddling birds and think of roast feasts. He would cross himself quickly, muttering a prayer for strength. One chronicle mentions a brother who dreamt vividly of goose dinners during Lent, waking with both hunger and guilt. Even in dreams, the honks followed them. There is humor there, and humanity, for no matter how solemn, monks were still men with appetites, still tempted by the smell of roasting fat and the sight of waddling birds. Let me draw you closer now. You sit at the table during Lent, a bowl of barley pottage before you. The steam is faint, the flavor plain, the silence heavy. Outside, by the window you hear it. Honk, honk, honk. You sigh, lower your spoon, and chew slowly. The goose, meanwhile, dips its head into the pond, flapping with joy, entirely free of rules. And maybe, in that moment, you smile, for the goose has no Lent, no Advent, no fasts, only honks. That smile is important, for monks were not forbidden to laugh. Indeed, many abbots allowed it in moderation, knowing that without humor, even silence turns brittle. Perhaps the geese gave them the best gift of all, uninvited comedy, a reason to chuckle in the middle of restraint. In this way, the abbey found balance. Goose feasts brought joy and richness. Goose honks during fasts brought humility and humor. Either way, the birds shaped their days. Now, as evening settles again, let's leave the kitchen and walk once more through the cloister, the stone cool beneath your sandals, the arches glowing in torchlight. From the chapel, chants drift low and steady. From the pond, honks drift high and unsteady. Two soundscapes weaving into one, and as you listen, let them merge in your own breath. In like chant, out like honk, a rhythm at once holy and ordinary, silly and sacred, carrying you gently toward rest. There was an old saying in parts of medieval Europe, "A goose at Michaelmas will keep the winter from your door." The monks at St. Gertrude's knew it well. A fattened goose at autumn's feast was thought to bring luck, to guard health, even to ensure full bellies through the cold months. And so, when the feathers were plucked and the fire blazed, the abbey did not simply eat. They partook in a ritual older than their cloister walls. Each bite carried with it the memory of harvest, the promise of survival. Picture the novices again, standing at the edges of the refectory, their bowls filled more generously on such feast days, their faces bright, despite the silence rule. The warmth of roasted meat lingered on their tongues, their stomachs eased, their hearts lifted. And though they said nothing, you can almost see the gleam of joy in their eyes. Now contrast this with the long plainness of Lent. 40 days of vegetables and broth, 40 days of monotony. Some monks described Lent as a time when flavors disappeared from the world. Bread grew heavy, water tasted flat, stew tasted of nothing but necessity. And yet, perhaps that was the point, to empty the senses so that when Easter came, even a goose egg seemed like a banquet. The eggs, in fact, were symbols themselves. During Lent, monks often avoided them, saving baskets until Easter morning. Imagine the kitchen then, filled with bright shells, with pies and puddings rich once more, with laughter that no rule could suppress. The geese, oblivious, continued to honk, their chorus announcing Easter as surely as any bell. Do you feel the rhythm now? Feast and fast, richness and restraint, honk and hush. It is the rhythm of life itself, up and down, full and empty, noise and silence. There is a small tale, perhaps apocryphal but charming nonetheless, of a monk who tried to trick his hunger during Lent by painting goose eggs with herbs so that they looked like apples. He set them on the table, stared at them, and told himself he was full. Of course, the honks outside quickly shattered the illusion. The goose will not let itself be forgotten. Another story tells of a novice who dreamed one night that the geese broke into the refectory during a fast, strutting up and down the tables, honking triumphantly. He awoke laughing, though his stomach growled. The dream was written into the margins of a psalter, a tiny doodle of a goose doing. Ron beside the psalm, "My soul thirsteth for thee in a dry land." Even in scripture, humor found a place. Let's walk together now into the garden after supper. The sun has gone, and the cloister is painted in shades of silver. The geese wander quietly, heads dipping, their voices softer at this hour. The monks pass them by, their sandals brushing gravel, their lips murmuring prayers. The two worlds overlap, the holy and the honking, and yet they do not clash. They coexist, like candlelight and shadow. And perhaps this is the abbey's greatest lesson, that even the noise of geese can serve to deepen silence by reminding us that silence is never absolute. It is a choice we make within the world, not outside it. So let your breath mirror that now. The sound around you, whatever it may be, does not need to vanish. It only needs to soften, to blend into the edges of your rest. The monks learned this centuries ago, and you can learn it tonight. As the night grows still, the refectory emptied, the fires dimmed, the monks return to their dormitory. Outside, a last goose honks, then another answers, and then quiet falls like snow. The abbey breathes, the novices close their eyes, and the geese, whether feasted upon or spared, remain eternal companions in their dreams. As the seasons circled on, so too did the abbey's menu. In winter, the monks leaned heavily on stored roots, dried beans, and hard bread. Their stomachs, accustomed to plainness, bore it without complaint, yet always in the background lingered the memory of goose feasts. Come spring, the yard filled again with honks and feathers, and the monks once more debated the curious status of the goose. Was it fish? Was it fowl? Could it perhaps be both? Some abbots winked at the loophole, permitting goose meat during fasts, with the reasoning that a bird who swam as often as it walked might indeed qualify as fish. Others shouted okay their heads and forbade it strictly, lest loopholes open the floodgates of indulgence. But the geese, of course, cared nothing for such debates. They honked at both opinions equally. The kitchen told its own story. On feast days it roared with activity. Fires crackled, spits turned, pots boiled over with sauces thickened by goose fat. Herbs hung from beams, sage, parsley, thyme, snipped fresh and crumbled between fingers. The smell of roasting goose filled the air so completely it seemed to cling to robes, to stone, to every corner of the cloister. On fasting days, by contrast, the same kitchen fell into hush. The fire burned low, pots simmered with thin broth, and the scent was one of absence. Lent was not merely the denial of food, it was the denial of fragrance, of anticipation, of fullness itself. To walk past the kitchen during Lent was to feel the weight of restraint pressing as heavily as the cold stone walls. Yet in that absence lay its own peace. The monks understood that to miss a flavor was to notice it more deeply when it returned. To long for goose made its eventual taste almost transcendent. Fasting sharpened the senses. Feasting rewarded them. One novice, in a letter preserved long after, wrote, "The sound of the goose outside the window reminds me of what I lack, but also of what is promised." Isn't that beautiful? The honk, annoying at first, became a reminder of future joy, a sound that carried both hunger and hope. Even their quills, trimmed from goose feathers, were caught in this rhythm. On fasting days, monks bent over parchment, writing slowly, their pens scratching out psalms of restraint and patience. On feast days, those same quills might copy hymns of joy, their ink flowing just a little freer. In every word, the geese were present, sometimes in the silence, sometimes in the feast, always in the chorus. Imagine now sitting in the refectory on the evening of a feast. The monks eat slowly, but the atmosphere is brighter, lighter. A novice sneaks a glance at his portion, barely containing his delight. Across the hall, another chews solemnly, savoring without show. The silence is maintained, but it hums with warmth. And outside, the geese add their own soundtrack, not in mockery, but in harmony. Now imagine a fasting supper. The same benches, the same flicker of candles, bowls filled with thin broth, bread dipped into water to soften. The air is still, almost heavy, yet here too there is meaning. For the lack sharpens gratitude, the hunger makes every prayer feel more urgent, more alive. And again through the window comes the honk. Life goes on, reminding the monks that while they restrain themselves, the world still feasts. Perhaps that is why the geese mattered so much. They reminded the abbey that life was not always ordered, not always obedient to human discipline. Creation sang its own psalms, even if they were honks. As the day ends, the monks file from the refectory to the chapel. Candles light the nave, chants echo under the arches. The sound rises, low and steady. Outside, a goose honks once, then again, punctuating the chant like a curious percussion. The monks do not falter. They continue their hymn. and the honk, instead of disrupting, blends strangely into the rhythm as if it belongs there. Let your breath follow that now. In, like chant. Out, like honk. A balance between the sacred and the silly, the silent and the noisy, the fasting and the feasting. For that balance is what carried the monks through, and what can carry you too into rest. The turning of seasons meant the turning of meals, and the monks at St. Gertrude's lived within that circle. Every feast was anticipated, every fast endured, every honk accepted. Over years, the rhythm became so natural that many hardly thought of it. Goose on Michaelmas, plain broth during Lent, eggs bursting with flavor at Easter. It was simply the wheel of time. But when we pause to notice it, there is beauty in that simplicity. Think of the refectory again on a winter's feast day. The fire crackles, filling the hall with golden warmth. Platters of goose are passed with careful hands, each portion measured, each brother equal. The smell fills every corner, herbs clinging to the air, fat sizzling on the plates. No voices rise, but the silence is not heavy. It is a silence alive with gratitude. Now contrast it with a fasting supper. The fire burns lower. The bowls contain only beans and turnips, bread dipped in water. The same silence, but this time weighted, purposeful, a silence of waiting, of endurance, of faith. And through both, through feast and fast, the geese continue their chorus, sometimes loud, sometimes muffled, sometimes even comical, always present, always reminding the monks that life beyond rules goes on. One chronicler, writing many years later, noted, "The goose is both a feast and a penance, both laughter and labor. In its voice we hear both complaint and blessing." Perhaps that is the truest summary of their role. For in tending, eating, and enduring the geese, the monks learned the paradox of life itself, that joy and irritation, hunger and fullness, silence and noise are never truly separate. The novices, growing into full monks, carried these lessons forward. Goosekeeping became memory, memory became story, story became tradition, and tradition, in its turn, softened into lullaby. Imagine one such monk in old age, sitting by the fire on a winter's night. His hands tremble, his beard is white, his eyes half closed. A novice sits nearby, listening as he recounts the days of goose duty. He chuckles, his voice slow. "They taught me patience, those birds, more than any sermon." The novice smiles, knowing his turn will come, knowing he too will wrestle honks into memory. Outside, the geese still honk, eternal as stars. And you, listening now, can let that image rest within you. He fire crackling, the geese calling, the old monk smiling, a world both noisy and calm, both restless and restful. So breathe slowly, let the sound of honks in your imagination fade to murmurs, then to whispers, then to nothing at all. Let the silence that remains feel full, not empty, full of stories, of laughter, of patience, of feasts and fasts. And as this chapter closes, may your own night feel balanced too. Fullness and emptiness, sound and quiet, all folded gently together into rest. Good evening once more, dear listener. If you are still awake, let the edges of wakefulness soften. If you are already drifting, let these words wash gently over you, like ripples on a pond at dusk. Tonight we will wander into another corner of monastic life, the peculiar remedies and curious medicines in which geese somehow always seem to play a part. You see, medieval monasteries were more than places of prayer. They were also centers of healing. The monks kept herb gardens, rows of sage, lavender, rosemary, fennel, and mint. They dried leaves in bundles, crushed them into powders, steeped them into teas. Their apothecaries smelled of earth and resin, of vinegar and honey, of parchment notes pinned beside jars. And tucked among these shelves and scrolls were remedies that involved geese. One 13th century herbal text suggested rubbing rosemary oil onto a goose's feet if it appeared unsteady. The reasoning was never quite explained, but perhaps the monks believed strength in the bird's gait would mean health in the abbey itself. Picture it. A solemn monk kneeling in the yard, goose tucked under one arm, carefully massaging oil onto its orange-webbed feet. The goose honks in indignation. The monk sighs, but the ritual is performed nonetheless. Another record described using goose fat as a balm. Warmed gently over fire, it was rubbed onto aching joints or cracked skin. Soothing, though scented strongly, one brother noted, perhaps wrinkling his nose even as he felt relief. Imagine that, holy men smelling faintly of roasted goose as they knelt in prayer. And then there were goose feathers. Plucked and singed, they were sometimes steeped into strange poultices. One remedy claimed feather ash, mixed with honey, could ease a cough. Another swore that goose down stuffed into shoes cured chilblains in winter. You may chuckle, and perhaps the monks did too. But when nights were long and medicine scarce, every experiment was worth trying. In truth, geese were woven into healing as much as they were into noise and food. Their fat warmed, their feathers comforted, their eggs nourished. Even their bones were ground into powders for curious concoctions. Some remedies worked, some surely did not, but the effort itself carried a kind of hope. Let us step into the abbey's infirmary. The room is small, lit by narrow windows, the air scented with thyme and vinegar. Beds line the walls, straw mattresses covered in linen. A novice coughs softly, a monk snores faintly, another mutters a prayer in half-sleep. At the far end, a brother stirs a pot over a brazier, herbs and goose fat simmering into a balm. The fire crackles, the scent rises, the sound of geese drifts faintly from the courtyard. Healing, noise, prayer, all interwoven. Perhaps you've known such moments yourself, when remedies were strange, but comfort lay not in their logic but in the care behind them. A warm compress, a spoon of broth, a whispered word. It matters less what it is than that someone tended to you. The monks, in their way, knew this. Goose remedies may not have cured every ailment, but they carried with them the weight of care, the effort of love, and in that they worked wonders. So breathe slowly with me now. Imagine the infirmary's warmth, the soft creak of beds, the faint honks outside, the gentle hand of a monk laying balm upon your skin. Let that care settle in your own body, as though you too were being tended by centuries of quiet healers. For in the peculiar world of monastic medicine, even the humble goose became a vessel of comfort. By the flicker of candlelight, the abbey's infirmerer, often the most patient of monks, pored over herbal texts. His quill scratched slowly across parchment as he copied ancient recipes, blending practical wisdom with curious superstition. Goose fat, goose feathers, goose bones, they appeared again and again in those pages, tucked between more familiar herbs like chamomile or sage. Why geese? Perhaps because they were always at hand, honking reminders in the courtyard. Where chickens provided eggs and cows provided milk, geese offered fat and feathers in abundance. And when a monk coughed or shivered, it seemed only natural to reach for what the abbey already knew so well. Consider the remedy for chills. A cloth soaked in warmed goose fat, wrapped around the chest. Imagine lying on a straw mattress, the balm spreading heat slowly through the fabric, the smell heavy and earthy. A brother sits at your side, murmuring a psalm as he adjusts the cloth. Outside, you hear the faint chorus of the flock, as if the very birds lend their voices to your healing. There was also the curious belief that goose grease, rubbed on the soles of the feet, could protect against winter illness. The novices, no doubt, laughed as they smeared the ointment onto their toes, the cold stone of the dormitory floor slick beneath them. Yet perhaps it worked in its own way, not by magic, but by sealing cracks, easing soreness, making the long vigils bearable. And then the more peculiar prescriptions. One manuscript suggested drying the lining of a goose's gizzard, grinding it into powder and swallowing it with honey to soothe indigestion. Another swore that goosebone ash mixed with vinegar could heal wounds. Did they work? Perhaps not as intended, but they gave hope to the weary, and hope itself is medicine. The monks also turned to goose eggs. Large and rich, they were sometimes prescribed to strengthen the weak or the elderly. Beaten into warm milk, they became a tonic for exhaustion. Boiled gently, their yolks were mashed into poultices for skin irritations. The egg, simple and ordinary, became a vessel of healing as well as nourishment. Close your eyes and imagine the infirmary again, the shelves lined with jars, some filled with herbs, some with powders, some with goose fat sealed in clay pots, the air heavy with the scent of thyme and vinegar. A monk bends low, ladling balm onto a cloth, his hands steady, his breath slow. At the window, faint light drifts across his face, and beyond the glass, a goose waddles past, honking softly, healing and honking side by side. It is almost funny, isn't it, that such solemn care was carried out with birds squawking in the background, and yet, perhaps that was fitting, for healing is never perfect, never silent. It lives in the noise, in the mess, in the small comforts that carry us through. The monks accepted this with grace. They knew that not every remedy cured, but every act of tending mattered. A hand resting on a fevered brow, a spoon of broth, a balm rubbed into skin. These were sacraments in their own right. The goose simply happened to play its part in the ritual. So breathe with me now, slowly. Picture that warmth on your chest, that spoon of broth at your lips, that faint honk through the window. Let it soothe you, not because it is perfect, but because it is tender. For in the end, the monks knew, as we know, that the heart of healing lies not in silence or certainty, but in care. The infirmary at St. Gertrude's was never quiet for long. Even when patients whispered in half-sleep and the fire burned low, there was always some sound. The scratch of quill on parchment, the drip of an herbal infusion, the soft rustle of straw beneath a restless patient, and beyond the walls, always, the faint background chorus of the geese. It is hard to imagine a monk's recovery without that muffled soundtrack drifting through the shutters. The brothers who tended the sick believed that care came not only from prayer, but from practice, from trying whatever the world offered: herbs for the stomach, honey for wounds, vinegar for infections. And when those proved insufficient, the humble goose was never far away. Let us wander shelf by shelf, jar by jar. Here sits a pot of rendered goose fat, golden and thick, labeled in careful Latin script. The infirmerer scoops a small spoonful, warming it over a candle flame before rubbing it into the aching knees of an elder. The elder sighs, relief mingling with the smell that reminds him faintly of feast days. On another shelf rests a bundle of goose quills, trimmed not for writing but for medicine. Slivers of feather shafts were sometimes used as tiny tubes to deliver drops of liquid into ears or noses. Primitive, perhaps, but ingenious in its way. Imagine a novice tilting his head back while another brother drips a mix of vinegar and herbs through a hollow quill, the liquid cool against his skin. The honks outside grow louder at the exact moment the drop falls, and he laughs despite his discomfort. Further along, we find powdered goose bone, white and chalky, ground between stones. It was stored in little pouches. Mixed with vinegar, it was said to stop bleeding. Sprinkled onto wounds, it was thought to encourage healing. Was it effective? We might doubt it today, but in a world without modern medicine, such remedies offered both symbolism and hope. Bone returning strength to bone, and then the eggs, large, smooth, fragile, yet full. The monks prized them as food, but also as medicine. A broth of goose egg yolk stirred into warm wine was given to the weak, believed to restore vigor. A poultice of boiled egg, mashed with herbs, was laid on sore skin. Even the shells were not wasted. Ground fine, they became powders for treating acidity. The goose, in every part, offered something. Let us pause a moment in the garden, where many remedies began. The infirmerer bends to gather sage leaves, their sharp scent rising as he crushes them in his palm. A novice follows with a basket, glancing nervously toward the geese who waddle close, curious about the basket's contents. Honk, honk. The birds complain loudly, though they have no use for sage. The boy laughs, quickens his step, and nearly trips over a stone. The infirmerer sighs, steadies him, and together they carry herbs inside. Even here, the geese are participants in healing, whether by supplying fat or by testing the patience of young assistants. Some remedies, recorded in old manuscripts, read almost like spells. One claimed that carrying a goose feather in your shoe could ward off gout. Another recommended whispering a psalm over a goose egg before eating it, to ensure its strength passed into your own body. Still another insisted that tying a goose bone around the neck could calm a restless sleeper. Did these work? Perhaps not in the way intended, but perhaps they worked in the way all rituals do, by calming the mind, and by focusing belief, by giving the body permission to rest. And rest, after all, is half of healing. Imagine lying there, fevered and weary, while a brother ties a small bone charm at your neck. He murmurs prayers, his hand steady, his face serene. You breathe deeply, your mind soothed not only by the act, but by the care it represents. Outside, a goose honks sharply, and the monk smiles faintly. Even they pray for you, he says softly. And you believe it because in that moment, everything in the world seems part of your healing. The monks themselves often joked about their odd remedies. A marginal note in one manuscript reads, "This cure smells of feast day, though it is given for sore knees." Another scribble in the corner of a medical text shows a little doodle of a goose wearing a halo, as if canonized for its service to the infirmary. Humor, tucked between solemn lines, was its own kind of balm. And you, dear listener, can feel that balm too, for the story itself is a remedy of sorts, not because goose fat will cure you, but because the image of tender care, of quiet laughter, of honks drifting through the infirmary window can soothe the restlessness of your own night. So let us linger a little longer here. The fire glows low, casting shadows on stone walls. The shelves of jars gleam faintly in the light. A monk sits at a bedside, spooning broth of egg and herbs into the lips of a weary brother. Outside, the geese murmur softly, their voices subdued by the night. The patient swallows, sighs, and drifts into sleep. The monk watches, whispers a prayer, and then closes his own eyes briefly, his head bowed in drowsy peace. This is healing, not silence, not certainty, not miracles, just care given steadily, day after day, with whatever the world provides, even noisy geese, and perhaps that is enough. The more you read of medieval remedies, the more they sound like bedtime stories themselves, half practical, half fantastical. And when the monks of St. Gertrude's copied such cures into their manuscripts, they surely did so with a raised brow, perhaps even a hidden smile. One curious prescription claimed that goose fat mixed with crushed garlic and spread on cloth could cure toothache when pressed against the cheek. Imagine it, a brother pacing the cloister, cheeks shining with grease, smelling strongly of the kitchen, honks echoing from the yard. Did the pain subside, or was everyone simply too distracted by the smell to notice? Another text advised tying a goose feather to the wrist of a fevered patient, as if the lightness of the feather could coax the fever away. The feather was to be removed at dawn and thrown into running water, carrying the illness with it. Whether it healed or not, the ritual itself was calming, and calm is a kind of cure. There was also the belief that goose blood, carefully collected and dried, could be used in ink to write charms against nightmares. One psalter shows faint stains beside a prayer for peaceful sleep, perhaps evidence of such an experiment. The idea that the noisy bird could also guard dreams is strangely fitting, don't you think? The honk by day, the charm by night. And then, the most peculiar of all, goose dung. Some medieval texts recommended it, dried and powdered, for skin ailments. Others suggested it as a poultice for sprains. Even the monks, practical as they were, must have wrinkled their noses at this. Perhaps it was tried once, perhaps quickly abandoned. But the fact remains, in an age before modern medicine, nothing was wasted, not even the least appealing parts of a goose. Picture the infirmary faced with such a recipe. He sighs, copies it carefully into his book, but perhaps quietly hopes never to be asked to prepare it. Outside, a goose honks, as if laughing at the notion. Despite the oddities, there were moments of true relief. A novice suffering from chilblains might indeed feel comfort from goose fat rubbed into cracked skin. An elder with a cough might ease into sleep after sipping broth enriched with egg yolk. A patient burning with fever might relax simply because someone placed a feather charm on his wrist and whispered a prayer. In this way, healing was not merely about ingredients, it was about attention. The goose was simply one more tool in the monk's gentle arsenal of care. Let us step back into the infirmary one last time tonight. The shelves are lined with jars and bundles, the air thick with herbal smoke. On a bed lies a weary brother, wrapped in blankets, eyes half closed. Beside him, the infirmer applies balm to his hands, humming softly under his breath. At the window, a goose passes, its shadow crossing the wall, its honk muffled by glass. The patient smiles faintly. Perhaps the sound is not disruptive, but reassuring, for if the geese still honk, then life goes on, steady and unchanged, even in illness. Isn't that comforting, to know that the world continues, noisy and ordinary, even as we rest? So take another breath now, slow and deep. Imagine the warmth of balm on your skin, the sound of soft honks drifting through the night, the steady presence of someone sitting beside you. That is the heart of healing, not silence, not perfection, but presence. And with that presence, sleep comes more easily. As the centuries turned, the abbey's remedies grew into traditions. Some endured because they worked. Balms of goose fat that soothed cracked skin, broths of egg and herb that nourished the weak. Others endured simply because they were remembered, copied dutifully from manuscript to manuscript, even if no one quite believed in their power. The geese, of course, never knew the part they played in this quiet theater of healing. They strutted through the courtyard, honking at novices, splashing in the pond, tugging at hems of robes. Yet their feathers became quills, their fat became ointment, their eggs became medicine. The abbey's health was, in its way, bound to their noisy presence. Imagine the infirmer again in the stillness of night. He walks softly between straw mattresses, checking the sick. A candle flickers in his hand, casting long shadows across stone walls. From one bed, a cough. From another, a sigh. He pauses, lays a hand gently on a fevered brow, whispers a prayer. Outside, muffled by the thickness of walls, comes the familiar honk of a goose. He smiles faintly. It is not silence, but it is constancy, and constancy is its own kind of comfort. There is a lesson there for us as well. Healing is rarely perfect, rarely silent, rarely neat. It is noisy, messy, imperfect, and yet still enough. The monks learned to accept this just as they accepted the honks of the geese. One chronicle closes a section on remedies with the words, "God has given both herb and bird for the use of man, that he may be healed in body and in patience." That perhaps is the truest cure the geese offered, not only ointments or eggs, but patience. The patience to laugh at odd prescriptions, to endure the noise, to trust that even small acts of care have meaning. Let us walk one last time into the infirmary. The fire burns low. The shelves gleam with jars and bundles. The patients sleep, their breathing slow, their bodies wrapped in blankets that smell faintly of straw and thyme. The infirmer sits at a desk, closing his book of remedies. His quill rests beside an empty inkwell. He leans back, closes his eyes, and listens. Through the silence of the hall and the soft rustle of straw, a single honk drifts in from the courtyard. He smiles, and sleep claims him too. And you, listening now, may let that image guide you. Healing is not found in silence alone. It is found in the noise we learn to accept, in the presence we learn to trust, in the small rituals that carry us through the night. So breathe deeply, one last time for this chapter. In, out. Let the balm of care, the warmth of fire, the faint honk of geese settle into your own body. Let it carry you toward rest. For if monks could sleep peacefully with honks drifting through their infirmary, then surely you too can find rest, here and now. Good evening again, my friend. By now, perhaps your body has settled more deeply into rest. If your eyes are still open, let them drift half closed. If you are already floating near sleep, let these words be like distant bells, gentle and low. Tonight, we turn to another curious role the geese played in monastic life, as guardians, watchmen, and sometimes very noisy alarm bells. You see, medieval abbeys did not stand empty in the night. They held valuables, books copied by hand, vessels of silver for the altar, cellars stocked with food, gardens heavy with herbs, and in an age when roads were dangerous and law uncertain, monasteries sometimes attracted thieves. High walls helped, locked gates helped, but one of the simplest and most reliable defenses came feathered and honking. The monks of St. Gertrude's, like many across Europe, kept their flock not only for food, fat, and feathers, but for vigilance. A goose may be silly in daylight, chasing novices and flapping at shadows, but in the quiet of night, its sharp ears and sharper tongue made it a better guard than any sleepy watchman. Imagine the cloister garden under the moon. The pond glitters faintly, reeds sway in the night breeze, stars sprinkle the sky. The abbey is still, save for the rustle of habits as brothers shift in sleep. Then, a sound. Perhaps the creak of a gate, the scuff of a boot on gravel, the hush of someone moving where they should not. The geese hear it first. Their heads snap up, their eyes gleam in the moonlight. One honk, sharp as a trumpet, shatters the silence. Another follows. Soon, the whole flock erupts, a cacophony of alarm that echoes off the cloister walls like a chorus of horns. Monks jolt awake, novices tumble from straw beds, the abbot grabs a lantern. All because a goose noticed what human ears missed. There are stories, half legend, half truth, of geese saving abbeys from thieves, of monks giving thanks in their chronicles for the noisy flock that foiled a midnight raid. One tale tells of a band of robbers who crept into an orchard only to be chased off by a furious gaggle that honked so loudly the entire abbey roused before a single apple was stolen. And so, the geese earned their place not only as nuisances, but as guardians. Annoying by day, indispensable by night. Now imagine being a novice, shaken awake by the noise. You stumble through dark corridors, lantern lights swaying, the sound of honks echoing like rolling thunder. By the time you reach the yard, the thieves are gone, but the geese still shout, flapping wings, demanding recognition for their service. You cannot help but laugh, even as the abbot mutters prayers of thanks. The irony, of course, is that the same geese who warned against thieves also sounded alarms for absolutely nothing. A falling leaf, a passing fox, even the moonlight glittering on water. Any of these could spark a midnight chorus. More than once, monks were roused from warm beds only to discover no danger at all, just geese inventing trouble. But perhaps that too was a lesson. For vigilance, like patience, is never perfect. Sometimes we wake for no reason. Sometimes we mistake harmless shadows for threats, and yet, better a noisy false alarm than a silence that hides danger. Let's walk with the geese now, under moonlight. Their feathers gleam pale silver, their eyes shine black and alert. They shuffle restlessly, muttering to each other in soft honks. The pond ripples with starlight. In the distance, the abbey bell remains silent, for no human hand has pulled it. But in truth, the geese are the bell, a living alarm, unpredictable, untiring. And in that strange way, the monks found comfort. They could rest more easily knowing that even in their dreams, the geese listened. So as you lie here tonight, let yourself imagine those midnight alarms, not harsh, but oddly reassuring, a reminder that someone or something is always keeping watch. The chronicles of monastic life rarely linger on humor, yet between the solemn lines of Latin ink, hints of amusement peek through. When geese became guardians, they also became jesters, turning the abbey into a stage where midnight alarms were as likely to end in laughter as in danger. Consider Brother Hugo, a novice tasked with sweeping the cloister after Compline, the final prayers of the night. The moonlight silvered the stone, the broom whispered over gravel, and the abbey lay still. Then, without warning, the geese erupted. Honks rolled like thunder, wings flapped wildly, and Hugo froze, broom in hand, heart pounding. He was certain thieves had breached the wall. He rushed to ring the bell, only for the abbot to discover, moments later, that the intruders were two hedgehogs rustling in the herb garden. The abbot sighed, the monks chuckled softly, and Brother Hugo blushed. The geese strutted proudly, as though they had saved the abbey from terrible peril. Another tale tells of a fox who did indeed creep into the yard, drawn by the scent of eggs. The geese raised such a racket that the entire dormitory emptied into the night. Lanterns bobbed, sandals slapped stone, voices whispered prayers. By the time they arrived, the fox had fled, but not before receiving several sharp pecks on the tail. The monks laughed so hard that their silence rule cracked for once, the courtyard echoing with amusement. In their way, the geese had not only protected the eggs, but also lightened the monks' spirits. And so, the flock became both alarm and entertainment. The novices learned quickly that whenever the geese honked at midnight, the abbey would stir into an impromptu gathering. Some nights they grumbled, dragging blankets around their shoulders. Other nights they whispered jokes as they shuffled back to bed, grateful for the interruption of monotony. Let us picture one such night. The dormitory is warm with the shared breath of sleeping men. Suddenly, a honk splits the air, followed by another, louder still. In seconds, the geese are in full chorus. The novices sit bolt upright, hair tousled, eyes bleary. Lanterns are lit, sandals are tugged on crookedly, robes hastily tied. They march into the yard, only to find nothing. Perhaps a moth passed too close, perhaps a reed bent in the pond. The geese honk triumphantly anyway, convinced of their victory. The monks sigh, shuffle back inside, and try once more to drift into dreams. Isn't that life? The alarms we answer, only to discover no danger at all. The effort we make, only to find the shadow harmless. And yet each false alarm teaches patience. Each disruption becomes a story. Each honk finds its place in memory. By day 2, the geese kept watch. Merchants arriving at the abbey gates often found themselves greeted first not by monks but by the noisy flock. Some laughed, some grumbled, some even crossed themselves nervously, mistaking the chorus for ill omen. But the monks took it in stride. Better to be announced by honk than by silence, one abbot remarked dryly. There was, however, one great drawback. The geese had no sense of discretion. They honked at thieves and hedgehogs, but they also honked at abbots returning late from visits or bishops arriving in procession. Imagine a solemn bishop, crozier in hand, entering the cloister only to be drowned out by a cacophony of geese. The monks bowed, struggling not to smile, while the geese flapped and shouted as though mocking the grand occasion. The bishop, no doubt, found it less amusing. But perhaps, in their indiscriminate noise, the geese taught another lesson. Respect and rank mattered little to them. Abbot or novice, thief or hedgehog, all received the same noisy welcome. In their egalitarian honking, the geese reminded the abbey of humility. So as you rest now, think of that chorus. Not harsh, not frightening, but oddly comforting. A reminder that vigilance does not need polish, that watchfulness may come in clumsy, noisy forms. And perhaps in your own life, there are geese too. Alarms that sound for shadows but keep you safe all the same. Breathe with me now. In, out. Imagine the courtyard under moonlight, the flock gathered, heads high, voices raised. The monks stir, then laugh, then return to bed. And the night, noisy though it was, becomes part of their peace. Among the oldest stories told in cloisters was one borrowed from Rome itself, the tale of the sacred geese of Juno's temple, who honked so loudly when Gauls crept up the Capitoline hill that they saved the city. Monks loved this story, repeating it with quiet amusement, as if to say, see, even pagans knew the worth of a goose's alarm. And so, in their own abbey yards, when the geese honked at shadows, the brothers half imagined themselves heirs to that ancient tradition. Perhaps St. Gertrude's flock was not defending a city, but surely they were guardians of something precious. Books painstakingly copied, bread baked daily, souls entrusted to silence. There is another tale, half legend, half memory, of a novice who tried to test the flock's vigilance. Mischievous one evening, he crept into the courtyard after Compline, his cowl pulled low, his steps exaggeratedly sneaky. He made it 3 paces before the nearest goose honked sharply, wings flapping like banners in battle. Within moments, the whole abbey stirred awake. The abbot, unimpressed, sentenced the boy to sweep the cloister for a fortnight. Yet even he had to hide a smile at the absurdity. The geese, triumphant, strutted like generals who had foiled a grand plot. Imagine the scene with me now, the moon casting pale light on stone, the novice crouched like a thief, the geese exploding into noise, the monks spilling into the yard, sandals slapping stone. In the end, no harm done, only laughter tucked into memory. Even false alarms could weave themselves into the abbey's story. The flock's reputation as guards grew so firm that villagers nearby joked about them. "Better than dogs," they said, "for a dog may sleep, but a goose never forgets to honk." Pilgrims passing through often paused to smile at the noisy yard. Some even left offerings, crumbs of bread tossed through the fence, half in thanks, half in hope that the geese would be kind to them should they ever need protection. But there were nights, too, when the noise felt endless. Heavy storms often stirred the geese to chaos. Lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and the flock responded with a cacophony that carried through every corridor. Novices tossed in bed, covering their heads with blankets. Older monks muttered prayers, though not all were for patience. The storm might pass, but the honks sometimes lingered long after, echoing like phantom thunder. And yet, even then, there was something oddly soothing about it. For storms can be frightening, but to hear geese honking back at thunder is strangely reassuring, as if the abbey were not small and vulnerable, but surrounded by noisy sentinels shouting defiance at the skies. Let us pause here, under such a storm. The rain lashes the cloister roof, the wind rattles shutters, lightning whitens the courtyard. The geese erupt into a chorus, their honks rolling between the cracks of thunder. Inside, monks huddle in beds, their prayers mingling with the birds' calls. It is not silence, but it is company. A reminder that no one endures storms alone. That companionship may be the truest gift the geese offered. Their noise was constant, sometimes needless, often comic, but always present. The monks could count on it, even if it meant sleepless nights. Better too much noise than a silence broken only by fear. And as dawn broke after such nights, the geese were always there, strutting as if proud of their night's work. The monks blinked in the pale light, weary but smiling faintly. Life carried on, safeguarded by honks. Now, let your own breath carry that lesson. Whatever storms echo in your night, imagine them answered by a chorus of honks. Silly, stubborn, defiant. Let their noise reassure you that you are not alone, that even in chaos there is company. Not every alarm was loud, nor every watch dramatic. Sometimes the geese guarded simply by being there. Silent silhouettes in the moonlight, shadows moving along the cloister wall, the faint shuffle of webbed feet on stone. For monks pacing during long vigils, these companions were oddly comforting. Picture a brother keeping watch in the chapel at midnight. He kneels. He chants softly. The candles gutter in their holders. Beyond the chapel doors lies the garden, bathed in silver light. And there, near the pond, the geese move slowly, their reflections shimmering on water. They do not honk, not yet. They only murmur faintly, a chorus of quiet reassurance. The monk notices, smiles, and feels less alone. One chronicle notes that the geese keep vigil with us, as though the birds themselves joined the monks in prayer. Of course, their prayers were honks and flaps rather than psalms, but perhaps that mattered little. What mattered was presence, the sense that someone else shared the night. Novices especially found solace in this. When sent to carry messages between dormitory and chapel during the dark hours, their lanterns casting long shadows on the cloister walls, the sight of geese waddling nearby gave them courage. "If the geese are unafraid, why should I be?" one boy wrote in a margin note. Indeed, the flock's calm was a kind of shield, turning fear of darkness into gentle company. There were even times when the monks spoke of dreams shaped by the geese. A novice recorded a vision in which the flock circled the abbey, wings spread like angels, honking in harmony with the choir. Whether dream or imagination, the meaning was clear. The abbey felt safer with its guardians, both real and imagined. Yet, true to their nature, the geese could never remain solemn for long. Just when peace seemed complete, one would let out a sudden honk, loud, startling, absurd. A brother might jump, another might stifle a laugh, and the spell of quiet would break. Still, even this had its charm, for laughter in the dark is its own kind of protection. Let's walk now beneath the cloister arches. The night air is cool, smelling faintly of damp stone and herbs. Your lantern flickers, its light brushing the edges of carved pillars. Ahead, the geese are gathered, their white feathers glowing faintly in the moonlight. They turn their heads toward you, eyes reflecting like polished beads. One murmurs a soft honk, as if acknowledging your passing. You nod back, reassured. There is no danger tonight, only quiet company, feathered and watchful. And perhaps this is what the monks learned most deeply, that safety is not only in walls and gates, but in companionship, that to share the night even with noisy birds is to lessen its weight. So breathe gently, as if you too walk the cloister under stars, geese padding softly at your side. Let the rhythm of their steps, the softness of their murmurs, guide your own body toward ease. For in the end, whether honking alarms or quiet shadows, the geese always kept watch. And because of them, the monks could rest. As years passed, the monks grew accustomed to the rhythm of their guardians. They no longer startled so easily at every honk. Instead, they learned to listen with discernment. One tone for mischief, another for fox, another still for mere moonlight. The geese had their own language, and in time, the brothers understood it as clearly as bells. One abbot wrote in his notes, "We need no watchmen when the geese are wakeful, though they guard with clamor rather than silence." It was not a complaint, but a confession of gratitude. For what the geese lacked in subtlety, they gave in constancy. The villagers, too, trusted in the abbey's flock. Travelers passing by at night sometimes paused when they heard the chorus, smiling in the dark. "No thief dares St. Gertrude's walls," they would say, for the geese guard it more loudly than angels. There is a kind of poetry in that. Angels with trumpets, geese with honks, different choirs perhaps, but both serving as guardians. The monks carried these memories into old age. An elder, leaning on his staff, once told a novice, "I have woken to goose alarms more times than I can count. Once for thieves, once for a fox, 100 times for shadows. But in every honk, I heard the voice of care. The world watched over us, even in its noise." And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all, that safety is not always silent, that protection can be noisy, clumsy, even absurd, and yet no less real. Let us picture one last night in the abbey yard. The stars are sharp above, the pond gleams dark, the cloister walls glow faintly in moonlight. The monks sleep, their breaths slow, their bodies wrapped in coarse blankets. Outside, the geese stand watch. A rustle stirs the reeds. Heads lift, eyes gleam. One honk, soft and low, rumbles into the night. Another answers, but no alarm follows. Only reassurance, a reminder that someone is always listening. The abbey sleeps on, safe beneath its noisy guardians, and you, dear listener, may rest the same way. Let the geese of your imagination stand watch at your door. Let their honks carry away your worries. Let their presence, noisy though it may be, remind you that you are not alone in the night. Breathe slowly, deeply, in, out. The geese are keeping watch. You may sleep. Good evening once more, dear friend. If you are still with me, perhaps you are half adrift now, eyes heavy, body settled, breath steady. This final chapter will be a gentle winding down, a last walk with the geese through the Abbey grounds before we close the book and let sleep take us fully. The life of the Abbey was measured in rhythms, bells ringing, chants rising, seasons turning, but for centuries another rhythm lingered beneath, the voices of geese. Their honks stitched themselves into the hours of the monks like thread through cloth. Dawn brought the first chorus, midday, the noisy interruptions, twilight, the soft murmurs. And in the stillness of night, there was always one last honk, drifting like a farewell note. Imagine that twilight moment with me. The sun sinks, painting the cloister in amber light. Shadows grow long across the garden. The pond glows faintly, stirred by the slow drift of wings. The monks finish their evening prayers, their voices fading into silence. Then, from the yard, one goose raises its head and calls, a single honk, loud yet oddly tender. It echoes off stone, then fades into stillness. The Abbey settles into night. The novices, lying in their straw beds, grew to wait for that sound. Some joked quietly about it, whispering that the geese were saying Compline in their own tongue. Others took comfort, believing it a kind of blessing before sleep. And indeed, what was it but a signal that the day was complete, that the world had turned safely through another circle of hours? There is a tenderness in imagining such things, that even noise, when woven into rhythm, becomes part of peace, that even honks, once irritants, become lullabies. In old age, monks remembered these evenings most fondly. I could not sleep without their sound, one wrote. The silence of the world seemed too deep unless a goose reminded me of its voice. Now picture yourself there. The cloister walls rise around you, worn smooth by time. The air smells of herbs, of damp earth, of faint wood smoke. Beyond the windows, geese shuffle into their straw, feathers rustling. A single honk drifts across the night, not loud, not urgent, but steady. You lie back, close your eyes, and let it carry you into dreams. For isn't that what we all seek? Not perfect silence, but enough reassurance to let go. Not a world without noise, but a world where noise feels safe. And as we begin this last chapter, may the geese of St. Gertrude's Abbey remind you, every sound can become part of your lullaby. As twilight deepened, the Abbey always seemed to hold its breath. The bustle of day gave way to a softer pace, tools set aside, manuscripts closed, gardens left to their own quiet growth. In that hush, the geese became part of the evening's music. They shuffled toward their shelter, wings brushing air with a soft whoosh, feet slapping damp stone. Their murmurs were not the wild alarms of day, but low, throaty sounds, like conversations half-whispered, as if the flock, too, prepared for rest. A novice once wrote in his psalter margin, "Their voices at dusk are gentler, as if the birds themselves grow sleepy." And perhaps that is true. Even guardians must sleep. Even noisy creatures have softer tones at night. The monks noticed this, of course. Some evenings they lingered by the pond after prayers, watching the reflections ripple as geese dipped their heads. The water carried the last colors of sunset, rose, gold, deep violet, and the birds moved like pale lanterns across its surface. The monks did not speak, for the silence rule held after Compline, but in their stillness they listened. Honks became background to prayer, part of the same tapestry. It is easy to imagine Brother Anselm, weary from a day in the scriptorium, walking slowly along the cloister wall. He pauses at the pond, leans on his staff, and watches the flock settle. His shoulders drop, his breath slows, and the noise, once bothersome, becomes a balm. He murmurs a psalm under his breath, not to drown the honks, but to let his words mingle with them. And then the novices in their dormitory, curled on straw, blankets pulled to their hins, Through the narrow windows, the sounds drift in, the faint rustle of feathers, the soft splash of water, a final lazy honk. Some smile, some sigh, some drift off mid-thought, carried by the rhythm. It was, in its way, a lullaby composed not by men, but by geese. Even visitors noticed this twilight ritual. A traveler once wrote that St. Gertrude's Abbey falls asleep to the song of its flock. He may have meant it literally, the chorus of geese settling into night, but he may also have meant it figuratively, that the abbey itself seemed to sink into rest when the geese grew quiet. What a gentle image that is! The great stone walls, the wooden beams, the very earth of the cloister all folding into slumber alongside monks and birds alike. Now imagine yourself standing at that pond. The air is cool against your skin, carrying the faint scent of damp reeds. The sky is deepening, stars winking into place. The geese shuffle, honk softly, then fall into quiet. You breathe with them, slow, steady, easy. Their peace becomes your peace. And as the abbey drifts into night, so too may you. When monks grew old, their memories softened like parchment worn smooth by many hands. And often when novices sat at their feet in the long evenings, it was not grand tales of saints or miracles that the elders chose to share. No, more often than not, they spoke of the geese. Brother Matthias, his beard white as frost, once chuckled to a circle of novices, "I have prayed more hours than I can count, and copied more psalms than my eyes should have endured. But what do I remember most clearly? The night the geese chased a thief clean out of the orchard, honking like angels with cracked trumpets." The novices laughed, though quietly, for silence still reigned after Compline. Yet their eyes gleamed, and the story stayed with them. Another elder recalled the long winters, when the dormitory was cold and hunger lingered through Lent. "We dreamed of goose feasts," he said softly, "and even their honks in the yard reminded us of what was to come." His voice held no bitterness, only warmth, as if those memories of hunger had mellowed into gratitude. Even their complaints turned tender with time. One brother, once exasperated by midnight alarms, admitted in old age that he could no longer sleep without them. "The silence is too deep when the geese are still," he confessed, smiling at his own reversal. There is something touching in this, how what once irritates us can, in memory, become dear. The geese who disrupted prayers, who startled novices, who honked at hedgehogs and bishops alike, became, in hindsight, companions of a lifetime. Imagine the scene in the refectory on a long winter evening. The fire burns low, shadows gather in the corners, the elders sit hunched but smiling. Novices lean closer, eager for stories. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, dried herbs and goose fat lingering from the day's cooking. Outside, a soft honk drifts in, perfectly timed, as if to punctuate the tale. The room fills with muffled laughter, shoulders shaking under woolen robes. It is a memory and a moment all at once, and you, listening now, can share that warmth. For aren't our lives stitched together by such small, noisy companions, by irritations that turn to, comforts, by alarms that turn to stories? Breathe slowly and let those memories rest in you. Perhaps you have your own geese, things that once seemed burdensome but, with time, became part of your peace. Let them honk softly in the background of your mind, reminders not of disruption, but of continuity. For the monks knew this truth well, that the world's noise, when lived with long enough, becomes part of its lullaby. As the abbey slipped fully into night, the cloister grew still in ways that day could never match. The scriptorium was dark, its quills resting. The kitchen's hearth cooled to embers. The garden lay silvered in moonlight. Only two sounds remained: the steady cadence of monks at prayer in their dreams, and the occasional murmur of geese outside. It is easy to imagine walking those corridors now. The stone beneath your feet is cool. The arches above cast long shadows. You carry no lantern, only the moonlight guides you. From the dormitory, the faint rustle of straw as brothers shift in sleep. From the yard, a soft splash as one goose dips its beak into the pond. Then silence again. This was the true gift of the geese at night. Not only their alarms, their honks, their guardianship. It was the way they marked the silence itself. The monks learned to rest between sounds, like notes in a chant. A honk here, a shuffle there, and then a pause deep enough to cradle sleep. One novice described it beautifully. Their voices were like punctuation, teaching me that silence too has meaning. What wisdom for one so young. Even storms mellowed at this hour. Rain might patter against roof tiles. Thunder rumbled distantly, but within the abbey walls the geese no longer erupted. They had learned, after long years, that even storms grow tired. Their murmurs softened, their feathers fluffed, their eyes closed beneath the shelter of wings, and the monks, hearing that calm, let go of their own unease. There was a custom, whispered but never written, that the last honk of the evening was a kind of blessing. Whoever heard it first was said to carry peace into his dreams. Novices sometimes strained to stay awake, waiting for that final call. Elders, more patient, let it come when it would. And always, eventually, it came. A low, lingering sound, fading into the night. Picture it now. You are lying in your straw bed, blankets pulled up, the air cool against your cheeks. The dormitory is dark, save for the faint glow of moon through the window. From the yard, a single honk drifts in, long and steady, then silence. You smile, close your eyes, and surrender to sleep. The monks believed this rhythm would continue forever, that as long as their abbey stood, the geese would keep watch, marking the close of every day. And perhaps they were right. For even when walls crumble and voices fade, memory carries on. And tonight, through this story, their honks echo still. So breathe deeply now. Let that final honk settle in your mind like a bell tolling the end of wakefulness. Let silence follow it, wide and deep. You are safe, you are kept, you may rest. The Abbey of St. Gertrude's, like so many across centuries, lived in rhythms of prayer, labor, feast, and fast. But woven through all those rhythms was another, less expected. The rhythm of geese. Their honks, at first nuisance, became part of the monastery's very heartbeat. The monks learned patience in their noise, laughter in their antics, vigilance in their alarms, comfort in their companionship. And above all, they learned that peace does not require silence. Peace can exist within noise, when the noise itself becomes familiar, trusted, even beloved. So at night, when the candles dimmed and the chants ceased, the last sound was not always a bell, nor always a prayer. It was often a honk, a simple, ordinary honk, drifting across, stone walls settling into the straw-filled dormitory, tucking the monks into sleep as surely as a blessing. And perhaps you, dear listener, can take that lesson too. The noises in your own life, the creaks of a house, the hum of a city, the calls of night birds, can be your lullaby if you let them. They need not disturb you. They can guard you, accompany you, even soothe you, just as the geese once did for monks long ago. Now let us walk together one last time through the cloister. The moon is high, the stars sharp, the air cool, the pond lies quiet, the geese huddled in straw, their feathers glowing pale in the night. One lifts its head, lets out a final drowsy honk, then tucks its beak under wing. Silence follows, wide and deep. The abbey rests, the world rests, and so may you. Good evening, friends, and good night. May these memories of monks and their noisy companions guide you into peaceful dreams. If this gentle journey helped you unwind, you may tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. Only if it flows as softly as the story itself. And if you drifted off somewhere between the honks and the silence, let me know below. Your stories are part of the lullaby too. For now, sleep well, sleep deep, and may the last honk of evening carry you into rest.